Hi, I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and it's time for the Daily Diddy, bringing you P. Diddy trial updates all the way through every single day until we have a verdict. So, we are still in the middle of jury selection. However, we're getting closer. So, we had about 150 potential jurors in the pool. We've now been able to whittle it down to 45. So the process was basically they all had to fill out questionnaires, and then both parties, the defense and the prosecution, as well as the judge, went through the questionnaires and eliminated people who had clear conflicts, or if this would be, being serving on a jury would be too rough on them because they have a business and they're the only ones, or they're the sole caretaker for a child or an elderly parent. That those sorts of things can get you eliminated as a juror because, again, your mind is going to be focused on other things as opposed to the trial. So at this juncture, it's down to 45 possible jurors. Now, what was really interesting to note is that they asked, and being both sides, the prosecution as well as the defense, were really asking a lot of questions of the jurors as to whether or not they or someone they knew was a survivor of sexual violence. And the majority of them said that they either were or knew somebody that was impacted by this. So this is going to be very interesting to see how that plays out as the facts come out during the trial, because again, this trial is really centered on sexual misconduct, sexual assault, and all of that. So it could be triggering for folks. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out. So some of the folks that got the green light, you've got folks ranging in age from mid-20s to early 70s. They are a really diverse cross-section of society. So you've got a potential juror that's working as a graphic designer, and another juror that works on counterterrorism for the United States. So that's going to be really interesting, again, because you do want jurors that have a variety of life experiences, work, that kind of thing, to bring all of that to bear in the jury deliberation room. So some of the interesting folks that stayed and went, a couple things to note. So one juror had said that they saw the footage on CNN of the Cassie video where Diddy was brutally beating her and all of that. And she said, though, that she felt that this would be a domestic, that basically Diddy would be guilty of domestic violence. The judge was like, actually, he's not charged with domestic violence. He's charged with all of these other charges like sex trafficking, extortion, et cetera, et cetera. And then she kind of did a double take and was like, oh, well, you got to judge people on what they actually did. And I want to hear the whole story behind the video and all of this. So it kind of raised eyebrows because it was like, okay, you were saying this was totally domestic violence, this is awful, blah, blah, blah. And then when you got called on it, you totally flipped the script and you were like, oh, no, I could be fair and impartial. So one thing both sides always have to look out for when trying a jury trial is the folks that are like, pick me, pick me, pick me. Because sometimes jurors get on the panel and they have an agenda. So they already know that they're voting guilty. They don't care what evidence comes out, whatever, or they know they're going to vote not guilty no matter what evidence comes out. That's super dangerous. So gonna see what happens with her, but I get a funny feeling that she may get tossed as we get closer. Because remember, they're looking for 12 jurors and 6 alternates. So basically 18 people of the 45 are going to be moving forward. And some of the other jurors, you had one juror that admitted he was doom scrolling on his phone and he has seen coverage of the case. But again, he wasn't really paying too much attention. So he was allowed to move forward into the smaller jury pool. Another juror knew the judge in the case. So of course, right off the rip, that juror was gone because that's a clear conflict of interest. Another juror, this was kind of cute, didn't fill out the jury questionnaire in its entirety. And while this person was being questioned, he was kind of trailing off. He was kind of yawning and kind of all over the place. And the judge is like, dude, what's going on with you? And he was like, well, Your Honor, what happened was I was up all night binging a series or whatever. So, there were a few jokes back and forth about that. And, he was actually allowed to stay, even though, there were some concerns as to whether or not he was going to be fully focused and present and all of that. So, reality is we're still in the midst of this process. Basically, if the parties can agree on the final pool of jurors, so that's, again, the 12 plus 6, then we might have a situation where both parties can then start working on opening statements, and the trial is scheduled to start in earnest on May 12th. Now, one of the last parts of this process for the 45 people is what's called preemptory challenges. So basically, both sides get a certain amount of challenges where they can dismiss any juror for any reason except for one that's racially motivated. So if you're able to give a race or gender neutral reason as to why you want to strike this juror, then you don't have a problem. There's pretty wide latitude with that. So we'll see who gets struck and who ends up being in the final. So that's today's Diddy updates, and I'll be back with more tomorrow. Take care. Bye.